A billionaire was single for 20 years, until he collapsed at a fancy charity party and woke up to the woman who saved his life. She's an ER nurse, calm, kind, and completely unaware of the promise that kept him alone for 2 decades. Because when they were just 5 years old, hiding together in fear, he swore he would marry her someday. But she doesn't remember him. She doesn't remember the promise, and she has no idea her past was taken from her, or that he's been carrying the guilt ever since. Now buried secrets, a childhood accident, and a forgotten truth threaten to tear them apart just as fate brings them back together. Was this reunion meant to heal them? Or will the truth destroy the only love that ever saved him? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The crystal chandeliers cast a soft golden glow across the grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hotel, their light catching on the sequined gowns and polished cufflinks of Chicago's elite. In the corner, partially hidden behind a marble column, Leo Cole adjusted his bow tie for the 100th time that evening. The stiff fabric felt like it was choking him, though he knew that wasn't the real source of the tightness in his chest. A sharp twinge made him draw in a quick breath. He pressed his hand against his chest, trying to massage away the discomfort that had been building all evening. It would pass, he told himself. It always did. The orchestra struck up another waltz, and couples swirled across the parquet floor like autumn leaves caught in a gentle wind. Leo checked his watch. 8:45. Another hour of mandatory appearance time for the Cole Foundation's annual Winter Gala. Then he could retreat to his penthouse apartment 15 blocks away. Mr. Cole. A waiter appeared at his elbow with a silver tray. Would you care for champagne? Leo shook his head. Just water, please. He hadn't touched alcohol in 20 years, not since that night. The memory rose, unbidden, sharp and clear despite the decades that separated him from that snowy evening. The screech of tires, the crunch of metal, the promise he'd made in those terrifying moments, a promise that had shaped every day since. Another stab of pain made him wince. The water glass trembled slightly in his hand, and he set it down on a nearby table before anyone could notice. At 42 years old, Leo had built one of the most successful tech companies in the world. He'd transformed it into a foundation that helped thousands. His net worth was estimated at $12 billion. And yet here he stood, alone as always, watching other people dance and laugh and love. A couple swept past, the woman's red dress spinning like a flame, her partner grinning down at her with unguarded joy. Leo felt the familiar hollow ache that had nothing to do with his physical discomfort. He remembered dancing once, remembered what it felt like to hold someone and feel that lightness of heart. But that had been in another lifetime. Before, the pain in his chest intensified, spreading down his left arm. Leo loosened his bow tie, trying to take deeper breaths. The room suddenly felt too warm, too crowded. The music seemed to be coming from very far away. Mr. Cole. It was Sandra Chen, his foundation's director of operations. The mayor would like a word when you have a moment. Leo opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The room tilted strangely. He took a step forward, attempting to steady himself against the column. Mr. Cole, are you all right? Sandra's voice sounded distorted, as though he were underwater. The crystal chandeliers blurred into stars. The orchestra's waltz warped into a distant whine. Leo felt his knees buckle as the polished floor rushed up to meet him. The last thing he heard was Sandra's cry of alarm and the sudden screech of violin strings as the music cut off mid-note. Then darkness swept in, and the glittering ballroom faded away entirely. Around him, panic erupted. "Call 911!" someone shouted. "Clear some space!" ordered another voice. But Leo was already gone, his unconscious form a stark contrast to the gleaming floor and whirling gowns, while the promise he'd kept for 20 years hung silent and unspoken in the winter night. The other guests gathered in a frightened circle, their evening of carefree celebration transformed in an instant into something far more serious. Outside, sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder as they approached the Palmer House Hotel. But inside the ballroom, Leo Cole lay still and quiet, his carefully constructed solitude finally broken by the very human drama of crisis and concern. Sandra Chen knelt beside him, her hand on his wrist checking for a pulse, while the mayor's wife, a former nurse, loosened his bow tie and collar. The crowd whispered and pointed, phones appeared recording the scene, and the orchestra members stood frozen on their platform, instruments lowered, watching the drama unfold before them. In the suddenly still ballroom, under the warm glow of those crystal chandeliers, lay Chicago's most mysterious billionaire, a man who had everything and nothing, who had chosen solitude as his penance, and who had never shared with a single soul the weight of the promise that had shaped his entire adult life. The secret he'd carried for 20 years remained locked inside him, even as his heart betrayed him on this glittering winter evening. The elegant ballroom dissolved into chaos within seconds of Leo Cole's collapse. Champagne glasses clinked as people stumbled backward, gasps and screams piercing the air where waltz music had played moments before. A circle of onlookers formed, their designer shoes shuffling on the marble floor as they craned their necks to see what was happening to Chicago's most famous recluse. In the midst of the commotion, Riley. Parker's training kicked in instantly. She had spent the evening feeling out of place in her borrowed dress, wishing she'd never let her co-worker Sarah talk her into attending such a fancy event. But now, as she saw the man collapse, all self-consciousness vanished. This was what she knew. This was where she belonged. "Make way. I'm an ER nurse." Her voice cut through the noise with practiced authority as she pushed through the crowd. The sea of sequins and tuxedos parted before her. Reaching Leo's side, she dropped to her knees, not caring about the delicate fabric of her dress against the hard floor. "Sir, can you hear me?" Riley pressed her fingers to his neck, counting the pulse. Too fast, too irregular. His skin felt clammy under her touch. Classic signs of cardiac distress. A woman in an elegant black dress hovered nearby. "I'm Sandra Chen, his executive director. Is he—" "Someone call 911 if you haven't already." Riley interrupted, her voice firm but calm. "And I need space. Everyone back up at least 10 feet. She looked up at Sandra. "Does Mr. Cole have any known medical conditions?" "No, nothing," Sandra replied, wringing her hands. "He never misses a day of work. He's always seemed healthy." Riley nodded, continuing her assessment. She loosened his bow tie and opened his collar, noting the shallow, rapid breathing. Years of emergency room experience had taught her that keeping herself calm was just as important as keeping her patient stable. Without even realizing it, she began to hum softly, an old lullaby her adoptive mother used to sing when Riley had nightmares as a child. The gentle melody helped steady her hands as she checked Leo's vitals. Behind her, the crowd's panicked whispers became a distant hum. All that mattered was the patient before her. Leo's eyelids fluttered. A soft groan escaped his lips. Riley leaned closer, still humming that familiar tune. "Mr. Cole, stay with us. Help is on the way." His eyes opened partially, unfocused and clouded with pain. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Confusion, recognition, shock. But before Riley could process it, his eyes slid shut again. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the tense atmosphere. Riley continued monitoring Leo's vital signs, noting every small change in his condition. The humming helped her focus, pushing away the pressure of hundreds of eyes watching her every move. Within minutes, paramedics burst through the ballroom doors, their equipment clattering against the marble floor. Riley shifted seamlessly into giving them a concise report. Male patient, approximately 40 to 45 years old, sudden collapse with signs of cardiac distress. Pulse is rapid and irregular, breathing shallow, skin diaphoretic. No known medical conditions. The paramedics worked quickly, attaching monitors and preparing Leo for transport. Riley stepped back, her role complete, but something kept her rooted to the spot. Maybe it was the way his eyes had locked onto hers in that brief moment of consciousness, or the strange feeling that she'd seen that face somewhere before. As they lifted him onto the stretcher, Leo's eyes opened once more. This time, there was no mistaking the shock of recognition that crossed his features as his gaze found Riley's face. Their eyes met for one electric moment, his filled with a mixture of pain and something that looked almost like desperate hope, hers steady and reassuring despite her confusion at his reaction. Then his eyes closed again, and the paramedics were rushing him toward the exit, the crowd finally dispersing in their wake. Riley stood still, her heart pounding with an emotion she couldn't quite name. The lullaby she'd been humming died in her throat as she watched them wheel Chicago's most mysterious billionaire away into the cold winter night. Sandra Chen appeared at her side, clutching a business card. "Thank you," she said softly, pressing the card into Riley's hand. Would you be willing to give me your contact information? The Foundation will want to thank you properly." Riley accepted the card automatically, her mind still on that strange moment of connection. Around them, the ballroom slowly returned to normal. The orchestra tentatively resumed playing. Guests gathered in small clusters, whispering about what they'd witnessed. But Riley barely noticed any of it, her thoughts consumed by the look in Leo Cole's eyes, a look that seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken words. The whole incident had lasted less than 15 minutes, but Riley couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. Something that went beyond a simple medical emergency at a charity gala. She looked down at the business card in her hand, then back at the ballroom doors where Leo had disappeared. What had he seen when he looked at her? Why did it feel like he'd recognized her? And why couldn't she shake the nagging sensation that she'd seen him somewhere before, long ago, in a memory just out of reach? The steady beep of heart monitors filled the quiet ICU room as pale morning light filtered through partially closed blinds. Leo Cole's eyes fluttered open slowly, his consciousness returning in fragments. The crisp hospital sheets felt foreign against his skin, so different from the sleek tuxedo he'd worn at the gala. His chest still ached, but the sharp pain had dulled to a manageable throb. As his vision cleared, he became aware of a figure standing at the foot of his bed. The early sunlight caught her dark hair, creating a soft halo effect that made his breath catch. She wore simple blue scrubs now, instead of the elegant evening gown from the gala, but he would have known her anywhere. His heart monitor betrayed him, beeping slightly faster. "Mr. Cole," Riley said softly, checking his chart. "I'm glad to see you're awake. I'm Riley Parker. I was at the gala last night when you collapsed. I stayed to give the doctors a complete report of what happened." Leo couldn't stop staring at her face. The same gentle eyes, the same determined set of her jaw, features he'd seen in his dreams for 20 years. His hands trembled slightly as they gripped the bedsheet. Could it really be her, after all this time? "How are you feeling?" Riley asked, moving closer to check his IV line. Her voice carried the same soothing quality it had held the night before. Leo had to swallow hard before he could speak. "I've been better," he managed, his voice rough from sleep. But I suppose I've been worse too." She nodded professionally, but Leo could see the genuine concern in her eyes. "The doctors will be in shortly to discuss your condition. You gave everyone quite a scare last night." Leo barely heard her medical explanation. His mind was racing, trying to reconcile the child he remembered with the confident woman before him. He had to know for sure. "Did you?" he started, then had to pause as emotion threatened to overwhelm him. The heart monitor's beeping increased again. "Did you ever go by another name, when you were younger?" Riley's brow furrowed in confusion. "I'm sorry." "As a child?" Leo pressed, his voice trembling. "Before you were Riley Parker, did you have another name?" She took a step back, maintaining her professional demeanor, but clearly unsettled by the strange question. "Mr. Cole, you've been through a traumatic event. Sometimes medication and stress can cause confusion." "Please," Leo interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to know." Riley studied him for a moment, concern evident in her expression. "I was adopted when I was 6 years old," she said finally. "That's when I became Riley Parker, but I really don't see how that's relevant to your medical care, Mr. Cole." Leo's hands gripped the sheets tighter, his knuckles turning white. Everything inside him wanted to tell her, to explain why he was asking, to pour out 20 years of guilt and regret. But he held back, knowing this wasn't the time or place. Not when she was looking at him like he might be delirious. "It's you," he whispered, more to himself than to her. The words carried the weight of 2 decades of searching, of wondering, of hoping against hope. Riley took another step towards the door, maintaining her professional smile despite her obvious discomfort. "I should let you rest, Mr. Cole. The doctors will be in soon." She left the room with measured steps, but Leo could see the tension in her shoulders. He watched her go, his heart aching with more than just physical pain. The monitors continued their steady beeping as morning light filled the room, but Leo barely noticed. His mind was 20 years in the past, with a little girl whose name hadn't been Riley Parker then. Through the window in his door, he could see her pausing at the nurse's station, her movements slightly less confident than before. She glanced back at his room once, a small furrow still between her brows, before disappearing around the corner. Leo lay back against his pillows, overwhelmed by the reality that the person he'd spent 20 years looking for had been the one to save his life. And she had no idea who he was or what they shared. The irony would have made him laugh if it didn't make him want to cry instead. The morning sun continued its slow climb, casting long shadows across his hospital room. Leo stared at the ceiling, his mind full of memories he'd never shared with anyone. Outside his room, the hospital began to wake up properly, but he barely registered the increasing activity. All he could think about was Riley Parker, and how the sound of her humming that familiar tune had reached straight into his past and turned his world upside down. Later that morning, sunlight streamed through the large windows of the hospital room as Leo sat propped up against his pillows. The doctors had just finished their rounds, confirming that while he'd had a severe anxiety attack combined with exhaustion, his heart was fundamentally sound. With proper rest and some lifestyle changes, he would make a full recovery. But Leo could barely focus on their medical advice. His mind kept returning to Riley. He needed to talk to her again before she left, needed to know if his suspicions were right. When a nurse came to check his vitals, he asked if Nurse Parker was still on duty. "She's finishing up her paperwork before heading home," the nurse replied. "Her shift ended hours ago, but she stayed to handle your case. Could you—" Leo hesitated, then pressed on. "Could you ask if she'd be willing to speak with me? Just for a few minutes?" The nurse gave him a considering look, but nodded. 10 minutes later, Riley appeared in his doorway, looking tired but composed in her street clothes, simple jeans and a warm sweater that made her seem more approachable than her earlier professional demeanor. "The nurse said you wanted to talk," she said, maintaining a careful distance. Leo nodded. "Would you mind if we spoke somewhere more private? The visitors' lounge, perhaps?" Riley hesitated for a moment before agreeing. 5 minutes, she said firmly. After getting cleared to leave his room in a wheelchair, they made their way to the small lounge at the end of the hall. Early morning light painted the empty room in soft colors. Riley helped him transfer to one of the comfortable chairs before taking a seat across from him. The silence stretched between them as Leo struggled to find the right words. How do you tell someone they might be the missing piece of your past? "I want to apologize first," he began, "for my strange questions earlier. But there's something I need to tell you, and I hope you'll hear me out." Riley's expression remained neutral, but she nodded for him to continue. Leo took a deep breath. 20 years ago, I was in kindergarten at Lincoln Elementary in Milwaukee. One day during recess, I fell from the monkey bars and hit my head. I was terrified, bleeding, crying. His voice grew softer with the memory. But there was this little girl who stayed with me while everyone else ran to get help. She held my hand and sang to me, the same tune you were humming last night when you were helping me. Riley's professional mask slipped slightly, showing surprise at the mention of her humming. "That little girl," Leo continued, his voice thick with emotion. "She made me promise something while we waited for the teachers to come. She made me promise that when we grew up, I would marry her so she would always have someone to take care of her." He watched Riley's face carefully as he spoke. "Her name was Riley." A small laugh escaped her, though it held more disbelief than humor. "Mr. Cole, surely you understand how unlikely that sounds. Riley isn't such an uncommon name. You were wearing a yellow dress with butterflies on it." Leo interrupted gently. "Your hair was in 2 braids with blue ribbons. You had a band-aid on your knee from falling off your bike the day before." The color drained from Riley's face. Her hands, resting in her lap, tightened into fists. "I was adopted when I was 6, she said quietly. I don't remember much from before then. It's all fragments, pieces that don't quite fit together." "I know," Leo said softly. "I tried to find you after you disappeared. No one would tell me what happened to you. I was just a kid myself, but I never forgot. I kept looking all these years." Riley stood abruptly, wrapping her arms around herself. "Mr. Cole, I appreciate what you're trying to say, but it's too much. Even if what you're saying is true, and I'm not saying it is, it was 20 years ago. We were children." "I know how this must sound," Leo said, fighting the urge to stand as well. "I'm not trying to hold you to a childhood promise or suggest anything inappropriate. When I heard you humming that song last night, when I saw your face, I've wondered for so long what happened to that little girl who showed such kindness to a scared little boy." Riley's professional demeanor slipped back into place like armor. "Mr. Cole, you've been through a traumatic event. Sometimes our minds try to make connections that aren't there, to find meaning in coincidence. It's not coincidence," Leo said quietly. "But I understand if this is overwhelming. I'm sorry if I've made you uncomfortable. That wasn't my intent." She nodded stiffly, already backing toward the door. "I should go. My shift ended hours ago and I need to get some rest." "Of course," Leo said, his heart heavy but understanding. "Thank you, Riley. Not just for listening, but for last night, for helping me." "It's my job," she replied automatically, but her voice wavered slightly. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Cole." Leo watched her leave, noting how her usual confident stride seemed slightly unsteady. He sat there in the quiet lounge for a long moment, surrounded by the growing morning light, before calling for a nurse to help him back to his room. The sun was fully risen by the time Riley made it to her car in the hospital parking lot. Her hands shook slightly as she put the key in the ignition. The drive home was a blur of early morning traffic and troubled thoughts. Leo Cole's words kept echoing in her mind. A yellow dress with butterflies, blue ribbons in her hair. That song, the one her birth mother used to sing, the one she hummed without thinking when she needed to stay calm. How could he have known those details? She gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to focus on the road ahead. But her mind kept drifting to the way he'd looked at her. Those dark eyes full of recognition and something that looked almost like hope. Something that made her chest feel tight and her carefully ordered world feel suddenly unstable. As she pulled into her driveway, the first rays of sunrise painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Riley sat in her car for a long moment, watching the light change, unable to shake the feeling that something significant had shifted in her life, something she wasn't sure she was ready to face. The elevator doors opened silently to Leo's penthouse apartment, its polished surfaces gleaming in the fading evening light. His personal doctor, Dr. Matthews, followed closely behind him, rattling off instructions that Leo barely heard. Bed rest for at least 48 hours. Dr. Matthews emphasized, setting a paper bag of medications on the kitchen counter. No work calls, no meetings, no stress. I mean it, Leo. That heart attack was a warning shot across the bow. Leo nodded absently, his mind elsewhere. Thank you, doctor. I'll be fine from here. After seeing the doctor out, Leo stood in his vast living room, feeling oddly small amid the expensive furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago's glittering skyline. The space suddenly felt too empty, too quiet. Without bothering to change out of his hospital-wrinkled suit, he made his way to his home office. The hidden wall safe opened with a soft click. Inside, behind folders of important documents and valuable items, sat a weathered shoebox, plain cardboard worn soft at the corners from years of handling. Leo's hands trembled slightly as he lifted it out, carrying it reverently to his desk. The lid came off with a whisper of cardboard against cardboard. The contents remained exactly as he'd last arranged them, preserved like artifacts from a lost civilization. In a way, they were. His fingers brushed over childhood drawings done in crayon, stick figures holding hands, one taller with brown hair, one smaller with yellow braids, class photos from kindergarten, the edges soft and worn, and there, carefully folded and protected in a plastic sleeve, a prayer written in wobbly child's handwriting. Dear God, please help me find Riley again someday. I promised to take care of her. I didn't mean to break my promise. Please keep her safe until I can find her. Love, Leo. He unfolded it carefully, remembering the night he'd written it, tears staining the paper as his parents insisted they couldn't track down one missing student, that he needed to forget about it and focus on getting better. They'd been so concerned about lawsuits, about keeping everything quiet. I never forgot. He whispered to the empty room. I never stopped looking. Images from the playground accident flooded back. The blood, the terror, but most of all the small, warm hand holding his, the sweet voice singing softly until help came. He remembered promising to marry her, to always take care of her. A child's promise, perhaps, but one that had shaped his entire life. Leo sank to his knees beside his desk, hands clasped, head bowed. Lord, he whispered, I've carried this for so long. Is this why you brought her back into my life? Please give me a sign. Show me what you want me to do. Across town, Riley's key turned in the lock of her modest two-bedroom apartment. Mom? She called softly. I'm home. In here, sweetheart. came the weak reply from the bedroom. Sarah Parker lay propped up in bed, oxygen tubing beneath her nose, a book open on her lap. Her face lit up at the sight of her daughter, though concern creased her brow. "You look exhausted, honey. Rough shift?" Riley managed a small smile, sinking into the chair beside the bed. "You could say that." She checked her mother's oxygen levels and medication schedule automatically, her nurse's training never quite turning off. "How are you feeling?" "Oh, same as always. Better now that you're home." Sarah patted Riley's hand. "Something's troubling you. I can see it in your eyes." Riley hesitated, then shared the story of Leo Cole's collapse and his subsequent claims about their shared past. As she spoke, Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. "You know," Sarah said slowly, "when we adopted you, there were gaps in your records. The social workers said you'd been through some kind of accident, that there might be trauma you'd blocked out." "Mom," Riley's voice wavered, "I'm just saying, maybe this isn't as impossible as it seems." Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand. "God works in mysterious ways, sweetheart." Riley stood abruptly, needing movement. "I should start dinner, and these bills won't pay themselves." She escaped to the kitchen, where a stack of medical bills waited on the table. The numbers blurred as she sorted through them. Hospital stays, medications, home healthcare visits. Their insurance covered some, but the rest. She pushed them aside with a sigh. Later that night, after making sure her mother was comfortable, Riley knelt beside her own bed. The day's events weighed heavily on her heart. "Lord," she prayed softly, "I don't understand. Why now? Why him? If this is real—" She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Please give me wisdom. Show me what to do with this, and please help me find a way to take care of Mom." The night settled around her, quiet except for the distant sounds of city traffic and her mother's oxygen machine humming in the next room. In her mind, she could still see Leo Cole's eyes, the way they'd looked at her with such recognition, such certainty. It stirred something deep in her memory, like ripples disturbing still water, but the images remained just out of reach. She climbed into bed, physically and emotionally drained. As sleep began to claim her, that old melody, the one she'd hummed at the gala, drifted through her mind again. This time, instead of pushing it away, she let it come, wondering what other memories might surface if she stopped fighting so hard to keep them at bay. In his penthouse, Leo finally rose from his prayers, his knees stiff from the hard floor. He carefully returned the childhood box to its safe, but kept out the prayer, placing it on his nightstand. As he prepared for bed, following his doctor's orders at last, he found himself humming that same melody, the one that had brought everything rushing back when he heard it from Riley's lips. Two souls, separated by miles but connected by a shared past, drifted toward sleep. Each carrying the same question in their hearts, each waiting for God's answer about why their paths had crossed again after all these years. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Leo Cole's office as he adjusted his tie, trying to ignore the lingering soreness in his chest. The doctor had cleared him for light work, emphasizing the word light with meaningful severity. But this meeting couldn't wait. The Foundation Board members filed in one by one, their faces a mix of concern and curiosity. It wasn't often Leo called emergency meetings, especially not the morning after being discharged from the hospital. He waited until they were all seated around the polished conference table before speaking. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Leo began, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "I've been doing some thinking about our next major funding initiative." Barbara Chen, his longtime head of charitable operations, raised an eyebrow. "Leo, shouldn't you be resting?" "Probably." He managed a small smile. "But this is important. I want to establish an anonymous funding package for St. Mary's Hospital, specifically their emergency department and patient assistance programs. The board members exchanged glances. Mark Thompson, the Foundation's legal counsel, leaned forward. Anonymous? That's unusual for us. Our transparency has always been a cornerstone of public trust. Leo moved to the window, looking out over the Chicago skyline. This is different. I want no publicity, no naming rights, no press releases. The money goes directly to helping patients who can't afford care and to supporting the emergency department staff. This wouldn't have anything to do with that nurse who saved your life, would it? Barbara asked gently. Leo turned back to face them. It has everything to do with seeing firsthand what our healthcare workers deal with every day. And yes, meeting Nurse Parker opened my eyes to some realities I've been sheltered from. The meeting continued for another hour, working out details and legal requirements. By the end, they had a framework in place, a $10 million initial grant, with provisions for ongoing support, all carefully structured to maintain anonymity. As the board members filed out, Barbara lingered behind. "Leo," she said softly, "are you sure you're okay? This seems very personal." "It is personal," he admitted, "but sometimes personal motivation leads to the right thing for the right reasons." Across town, Riley pushed through the emergency department doors, tying her hair back as she walked. The familiar, controlled chaos of the ER wrapped around her. Monitors beeping, phones ringing, the constant motion of staff and patients. "Parker!" Dr. Martinez called out. "Heads up. Your Billionaire's back for follow-up tests." Riley's steps faltered for just a moment. "He's not my billionaire," she muttered, but headed toward the cardiology wing anyway. Professional duty won out over personal discomfort. She found Leo sitting on the edge of an exam bed, looking decidedly less commanding in a hospital gown than he had in his tuxedo at the gala. Their eyes met, and that same strange current of recognition passed between them. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," she said, keeping her voice professionally neutral as she checked his vitals. "How are you feeling today?" "Better, thanks to you." His voice was soft, sincere. "I never properly thanked you for what you did at the gala." "You don't need to thank me." Riley made a note on his chart. "I was just doing my job. We both know it was more than that." Leo watched her face carefully. "You stayed. You made sure I was okay. That song you were humming." "Your blood pressure is still a bit high." Riley interrupted, forcing herself to focus on the monitors. "Have you been taking the medications as prescribed?" Leo accepted the change of subject with grace. "Yes, religiously. Though I admit it's strange having to schedule my day around pills." "Welcome to being mortal like the rest of us," Riley said, then immediately worried it sounded too familiar. But Leo just laughed, a warm sound that made the tension in the room ease slightly. Their interaction continued with careful politeness as Riley assisted with his tests. Each was acutely aware of the other's presence, of the weight of unspoken questions between them. When the tests were complete, Leo caught her hand gently as she turned to leave. "Riley," he said softly, "I know you don't remember, or maybe don't want to remember, but I want you to know that meeting you again, it matters to me." She slipped her hand free, but not unkindly. "Mr. Cole, I'm glad you're recovering well. Please take care of yourself." The rest of Riley's shift passed in a blur of patience and procedures. It wasn't until she was gathering her things to leave that her phone buzzed with a message from her mother's pharmacy. She opened it, then had to lean against the wall as the words sank in. "Insurance denied Mom's new prescription," she whispered to herself, mental calculations already spinning. The medication cost $800 a month without coverage. They were already stretching every dollar to its breaking point. She sank onto a bench in the locker room, head in her hands. A prayer rose automatically to her lips, not for the first time, and certainly not for the last. Lord, I need your help with this one. I don't know how we're going to manage. The image of Leo Cole's concerned face flashed through her mind, but she pushed it away firmly. Whatever connection he thought they shared, whatever past he believed they had together, she couldn't let that influence her professional judgment or her personal integrity. Still, as she gathered her things to head home, she couldn't help wondering why God had brought this complicated situation into her life at exactly the moment when she felt least equipped to handle it. The hospital chapel sat quiet and still in the late afternoon light. Sunbeams filtered through stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across empty pews. Leo paused in the doorway, drawn to the peaceful atmosphere after his latest round of tests. He hadn't planned to come here. His next appointment wasn't for another 45 minutes, and he'd found himself wandering the halls, restless with thoughts he couldn't quiet. The chapel door had stood open, inviting. As he stepped inside, he noticed a familiar figure in one of the front pews. Riley Parker sat with her head bowed, still in her scrubs, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't move as he entered, lost in her own prayers. Leo hesitated, not wanting to disturb her private moment, but as he turned to leave, his shoe squeaked against the polished floor. Riley's head lifted, and their eyes met in the reflected light of the stained glass. "I'm sorry," Leo said softly. "I didn't mean to interrupt. It's a public chapel," Riley replied, her voice equally quiet. She wiped quickly at her eyes, and Leo realized with a start that she'd been crying. Without thinking, he moved closer, stopping at the pew behind her. "Are you all right?" Riley gave a small laugh that held more weariness than humor. "Just taking a moment to breathe. Some days are harder than others." "May I?" Leo gestured to the space beside her. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. He slid into the pew, careful to maintain a respectful distance. They sat in silence for several minutes, the chapel's peace wrapping around them like a familiar blanket. Finally, Riley spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you ever wonder why God puts certain people in your path at specific moments?" "Every day since the gala," Leo answered honestly. She turned to look at him then, really look at him, and something in her careful professional mask softened. "I've been trying so hard to keep everything separate and organized in my mind. Work is work, personal is personal, faith is faith, but lately it all seems to be blending together." "Life rarely stays in the neat boxes we try to put it in," Leo said. He hesitated, then added, "My mother used to say that God works in circles, not straight lines. Your mother sounds wise. She was complicated, like most parents, I suppose." Leo studied his hands. "She taught me about faith, but also about masks, about keeping up appearances no matter what you're feeling inside." Riley's expression flickered with understanding. "That must have been lonely." "It was, is." Leo took a deep breath. "That's partly why I've lived such a solitary life. It felt safer that way. Until the heart attack forced you to depend on others. Until you," he corrected gently. Riley shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Cole, Leo, please." "Leo," she amended. "I know you believe we share some connection from the past, but even if that's true, and I'm not saying it is, we're different people now. You can't build a bridge to the present using childhood memories I don't even have." "I know." He turned slightly to face her. "But maybe we could build a new bridge, not based on the past, but on who we are now." She was already shaking her head. "I can't. My life is complicated right now. My mother is sick and the bills—" She stopped abruptly, as if realizing she'd said too much. "Let me help," Leo said quietly. "Please, I have resources. No. Riley's voice was firm, though kind. I appreciate the offer, truly, but I won't be anyone's charity case, not even yours. It wouldn't be charity. It would be exactly that. She stood, smoothing her scrubs with steady hands. I've worked hard my whole life to stand on my own 2 feet, to prove that my worth isn't determined by where I came from or what I own. I can't compromise that, not even when things are difficult. Leo rose as well, respecting her words even as they stung. I understand, but please know that if you ever change your mind, I won't. Her smile was gentle but determined. But thank you for caring enough to offer. She turned to leave, then paused. Whatever happened between us as children, whether it was real or not, I hope you know that saving your life at the gala wasn't about the past. It was about being there when someone needed help. That's my calling, and I'm grateful for it. Leo watched her walk away, her head held high despite the obvious weight on her shoulders. He remained in the chapel long after she'd gone, thinking about faith and pride and the complicated ways God brought people together. That night, in his penthouse office, Leo made several phone calls. If he couldn't help Riley directly, he would find other ways she would never see or trace back to him. The hospital's new grant program would include expanded coverage for staff family members. The Employee Assistance Fund would be quietly tripled. Small changes that would help not just Riley, but everyone in her situation. It wasn't what he wanted, to sweep in and solve all her problems with a grand gesture, but it was what she needed. The dignity of solving things herself, with just a little invisible help along the way. And maybe that was what real love looked like, respecting someone's boundaries while still finding ways to lighten their load. The sunset painted Chicago's skyline in shades of purple and gold as Leo finished the last call. He walked to the window, pressing his hand against the cool glass. Somewhere out there, Riley was probably starting her evening shift, serving others with quiet strength and unwavering dignity. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, not for himself this time, but for her. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the free clinic's waiting room as Leo arranged pamphlets on a rickety table. He had started volunteering 3 days ago, choosing the earliest shift to avoid drawing attention. The worn linoleum floors and faded walls were a far cry from his usual surroundings, but something about the simple work of helping others felt right. I didn't expect to see you here. Leo turned at the familiar voice. Riley stood in the doorway, her scrubs fresh, but her eyes tired from what must have been a long night shift at the hospital. I help out when I can, he said simply, not mentioning that he'd specifically chosen this clinic after learning she volunteered here regularly. The early shift works best with my schedule. Riley nodded, pulling on a volunteer vest over her scrubs. Most people prefer afternoons, but morning is when we need the most help getting things organized for the day. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, sorting supplies and preparing intake forms. Leo noticed how Riley seemed more relaxed here than at the hospital, as if the humble setting allowed her to be more herself. The clinic got some new equipment yesterday, she mentioned casually while stocking exam room cabinets. State-of-the-art stuff we couldn't have dreamed of affording before. The director said it was an anonymous donation. Leo kept his expression neutral. That's wonderful news. Just like the new staff support programs at the hospital. All anonymous, too. She gave him a sideways look that made him wonder if she suspected something, but she didn't press the issue. The morning passed quickly as more volunteers arrived and patients began filling the waiting room. Leo found himself drawn to the elderly visitors especially, sitting with them as they waited, listening to their stories. He noticed Riley watching him occasionally, a thoughtful expression on her face. By the end of the week, they had fallen into an easy routine. Leo would arrive first, start the coffee brewing, and Riley would appear just as the sunrise began painting the sky. They rarely talked about anything personal, focusing instead on the work at hand and the people they served. But something was changing between them, slowly and naturally. The awkwardness of their earlier encounters had faded, replaced by a comfortable familiarity born of shared purpose rather than shared past. On Friday evening, after both had finished their respective shifts at the clinic and hospital, they found themselves walking to the nearby coffee shop together. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. "Thank you," Riley said suddenly as they waited in line. "For what?" "For not pushing. About the past, I mean. It's given me space to—" She paused, searching for the right words. "To let things surface naturally, I guess." Leo's heart quickened, but he kept his voice steady. "Have things been surfacing?" They found a quiet corner table, away from the evening crowd. Riley wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, staring into it as if looking for answers in the swirling cream. "I've been having these flashes, not quite memories, more like feelings, fragments." She took a shaky breath. "There's this playground, metal swings with chipped paint. I can hear them squeaking." Leo sat perfectly still, afraid that any movement might break the moment. The coffee shop sounds faded away as Riley continued, her voice distant. "There's blood. Not a lot, but enough to be scary when you're little. Someone's crying. A little boy, I think. I remember wanting to help, but also being afraid." She looked up suddenly, meeting Leo's eyes. "I remember holding someone's hand, really tight, like it was the most important thing in the world." Leo's hands trembled slightly as he set down his cup. His face had gone pale, but he remained silent, honoring her need to work through this at her own pace. "It's probably nothing," Riley said quickly, as if trying to convince herself. "Just random childhood moments getting mixed up with everything that's happened lately." "Maybe," Leo said softly. "Or maybe they're pieces of who you are, finding their way back to you." Riley studied his face for a long moment. "You really believe we knew each other back then, don't you? That it wasn't just a similar name or a coincidence?" "I believe," Leo chose his words carefully, "that God brings people into our lives for a reason. Sometimes it's for a moment, sometimes it's for a lifetime, and sometimes it's both." The coffee shop was nearly empty now, the baristas beginning their closing routine. Riley gathered her things, looking tired but somehow lighter, as if sharing the fragments had eased some invisible burden. "I should head home. Early shift tomorrow." "Of course." Leo stood, resisting the urge to say more, to push harder. "Thank you for trusting me with those memories." Riley nodded, then hesitated. "I haven't looked at my adoption papers since I turned 18. They're just sitting in a box under my bed, gathering dust. I've always been afraid that looking back might, somehow, I don't know, mess up what I have now." "The past doesn't have to threaten the present," Leo said gently. "Sometimes it can help us understand who we are and why we're here." "Maybe." Riley smiled faintly. "Good night, Leo." He watched her walk away through the darkening streets, his heart both heavy and hopeful. Back in his penthouse, he pulled out his own box of childhood memories, running his fingers over the faded crayon drawings and worn photographs. Somewhere across the city, he knew Riley was reaching under her bed for a dusty box of her own, finally ready to face whatever truths it might hold. The old Victorian house stood silent against the darkening sky, its weathered brick and ornate trim telling stories of decades past. Riley parked her car along the curved driveway, her hands lingering on the steering wheel as she studied the place Leo had once called home. Though no one lived here now, the property was immaculately maintained. Flowers still bloomed in careful beds, and warm lights glowed behind lace curtains. Leo waited on the wide front porch, hands in his pockets, looking simultaneously at home and out of place. His usual confident posture had softened into something more vulnerable, more reminiscent of the boy he must have been. "Thank you for coming," he said as she climbed the porch steps. "I know this is unusual." Riley nodded, her throat tight with unexpected emotion. "It's beautiful," she managed. "How long has it been empty?" 3 years. My parents moved to Florida, but I couldn't bring myself to sell it." He unlocked the heavy wooden door, its hinges creaking softly. Some places hold too many memories to let go. They stepped into a foyer that seemed frozen in time. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over polished hardwood floors and antique furniture draped in white sheets. Their footsteps echoed as Leo led her through rooms that felt both grand and lonely. "Everything's exactly as it was," Leo explained, his voice quiet. "I have a service maintain it, but otherwise—" He gestured to the covered furniture, the closed drapes. "It's like a museum of what used to be." Riley ran her fingers along a sheet-covered table, leaving trails in the thin layer of dust. "Why did you want me to see this?" Leo took a deep breath. "Because the proof I've been talking about, the drawings, the photos, everything from that day, they're all up here." He pointed to a narrow staircase leading to the attic. "I've never shown anyone. Not even my parents knew I kept everything." The stairs creaked under their feet as they climbed. Leo flicked a switch, and warm light flooded the attic space. Unlike the formal rooms below, this space felt lived in, personal. Old toys and books lined shelves along the walls. Cardboard boxes labeled in careful handwriting stood in neat rows. A child-sized desk sat beneath a dormer window, its surface clean but well used. "This was my hiding place," Leo said softly. "When things got too overwhelming downstairs, I'd come up here to think, to remember." He crossed to a particular box, one that looked more worn than the others. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted the lid. "I've kept everything from that day. Every drawing, every note, even the blood-stained shirt, though I'm not sure why." Riley moved closer, her heart pounding. Inside the box, she could see paper after paper covered in a child's careful crayon drawings. Leo lifted them out one by one, laying them on the old desk. "Here," he said, pointing to one. "This was the playground. And here's us." Riley's breath caught. The drawing showed 2 stick figures holding hands, one with a red scribble on its head. At the bottom, in wobbly letters, was written, "Me and Riley, she saved me." "There's more," Leo said, his voice rough with emotion. He pulled out a small photo album. "This was taken the day before the accident. Our kindergarten class picture." Riley's hands shook as she took the album. There, in a faded photograph, stood rows of smiling 5-year-olds. Her eyes found Leo immediately, smaller, with a mop of dark hair and missing front teeth. And next to him, "Oh my God!" she whispered. A little girl with honey-colored braids and bright eyes stood holding Leo's hand. The name beneath the photo read, Riley Martinez. Memories crashed over her like waves, the squeak of swing chains, the metallic taste of fear, a little boy's tears mixing with blood, the desperate need to help, to protect, the feeling of a small hand clutching hers like a lifeline. "The prayer," Leo said quietly, pulling out a single sheet of paper. "I wrote this that night, after they took you away in the ambulance. I didn't know if you were okay, if you'd live. I just kept writing it over and over." The paper was crumpled and tear-stained, covered in a child's careful printing. "Dear God, please let Riley be okay. Please don't let her die because she helped me. I promise I'll marry her when we're big if you just let her live. Amen." Riley sank to the attic floor, overwhelmed. Leo sat beside her, close but not touching, giving her space to process. "I don't," she started, then had to take a shaky breath. "I don't remember the promise. I'm sorry." "You don't have to," Leo said gently. "That was my promise to make. But I remember the feeling." She continued, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I remember feeling so scared, but also so sure, like helping you was the most important thing in the world. Like God put me there exactly when you needed someone." Leo reached out slowly, offering his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Riley took it. The contact sent a jolt of recognition through them both. Not romantic, but deeply familiar. Safe. Without speaking, they bowed their heads together. In the quiet attic filled with memories, their prayers mingled. Thanksgiving for paths crossing again, for healing beginning, for hope rekindling after so many years of darkness. Outside, the last light of day faded from the sky, but inside, something bright and warm began to grow. Not a promise of forever, but a promise of possibility, of healing, of hope. The morning sun cast long shadows across the social services building as Riley parked her car. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white with tension. After discovering her old identity last night in Leo's attic, she needed answers, real ones, documented in official records. The building's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she followed Ms. Thompson, a kind-faced social worker in her 50s, down a beige hallway. "I pulled everything we have from your file," Ms. Thompson said, gesturing Riley into a small conference room. "It's quite detailed, actually." Riley settled into an uncomfortable plastic chair, watching as Ms. Thompson spread several manila folders across the table. Her heart quickened at the sight of her original name, Riley Martinez, typed neatly on the labels. "Now," Ms. Thompson began gently. "You mentioned on the phone that you're specifically interested in the incident that led to your removal from Lincoln Elementary." Riley nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, I've started remembering pieces of it, but I need to know what really happened." Ms. Thompson opened the thickest folder, scanning through pages of typed reports. "The incident occurred on October 12th, approximately 20 years ago. You were 5 years old." She paused, looking up at Riley. "Are you sure you want to hear this?" "Please," Riley whispered. "I need to know." "According to the reports, you were on the playground during afternoon recess. Another student, a boy named Leonardo Cole, had climbed to the top of the jungle gym structure. Multiple witnesses stated he was shouting that he could jump to the next platform." Riley's stomach clenched. She remembered the shouting, remembered looking up at the small figure silhouetted against the autumn sky. "Several children gathered below, including you. The reports indicate that Leonardo was responding to dares from his friends. He attempted the jump, but slipped and struck his head on a metal bar during the fall." Ms. Thompson's voice continued steadily as she read from the documentation. "You immediately ran to help him, using your sweater to try to stop the bleeding. The playground monitors didn't see the accident happen, but they found you holding pressure on his wound and refusing to leave his side, even after emergency services arrived." Tears pricked at Riley's eyes as fragments of memory aligned with the official account. The sticky warmth of blood. The terror in Leo's eyes. Her own voice, high and childish, telling him everything would be okay. "However," Ms. Thompson continued, her tone growing more serious, "during the investigation, it came to light that Leonardo had specifically asked you to watch him make the jump. He wanted to impress you. When questioned, he admitted to daring you to watch, saying you wouldn't be brave enough to see him do it." The room seemed to tilt sideways as this new information sank in. What? The report states that you felt pressured to stay and watch, even though you told him it was dangerous. When he fell, you blamed yourself for not stopping him or getting help sooner. Riley pressed her hands against the cool table surface, trying to steady herself. But that's not why I was removed from school, was it? Ms. Thompson shook her head sadly. No. During your examination at the hospital, doctors discovered signs of previous injuries and neglect unrelated to the playground incident. Your home situation was already under review. The accident simply accelerated the investigation. For several long moments, Riley sat in silence, processing everything. Her memories of that day had always been hazy, clouded by trauma and time. But now, understanding Leo's role in it all, the dare, the pressure, the guilt she'd carried for not preventing his fall, it felt like a betrayal. Did he ever say anything else? She asked quietly. After the accident? Ms. Thompson flipped through more pages. According to this, Leonardo Cole was absent from school for 2 weeks following the incident. When he returned, you had already been placed in emergency foster care. The school counselor noted that he asked about you frequently at first, but his parents requested that staff not discuss the matter with him. Riley stood abruptly, needing to move. Thank you, she managed. I think I have what I need. The rest of her day passed in a blur. She called in sick to work, drove aimlessly through the city, and finally ended up outside Leo's building as evening approached. The security guard recognized her from previous visits and waved her up without question. Leo answered his door on the first knock, as if he'd been waiting for her. One look at her face told him everything. You know, he said quietly. Why didn't you tell me? Riley's voice cracked. When we met again at the hospital, when you talked about promises and memory, why didn't you tell me the whole truth? He stepped back, letting her enter the penthouse. I've carried that guilt for 20 years, Riley. Every time I close my eyes, I see you trying to save me, your sweater covered in my blood. Blood that was there because of my stupid pride, my need to show off. You dared me to watch. The words burst from her like a dam breaking. You made me feel responsible for staying there, for witnessing your reckless stunt. Do you know how many years I blamed myself, even without remembering exactly why? Leo's face crumpled. I know, God, I know. It's why I've punished myself all these years, why I've lived alone, why I never let myself get close to anyone. That day, what I did, it changed both our lives forever. They took me away because of other things. Riley said, her voice hollow. Things at home. But that day on the playground, that was the trigger. And you knew. All this time you knew. Yes. Leo's admission was barely audible. When my parents told me you weren't coming back to school, I broke into the principal's office trying to find out where you'd gone. That's when I learned about your home situation. I was just a kid, but I understood enough to know that my actions had exposed your pain to the world. Riley wrapped her arms around herself, fighting back sobs. How can you talk about childhood promises and God bringing us back together when you've been hiding this? How can there be anything real between us when it's built on a lie? It wasn't a lie, Leo pleaded. The promise I made that day, to marry you if you lived, it came from genuine remorse, from seeing your pure heart even in the midst of my mess. You showed me what real love looked like, Riley. You showed me God's grace through your actions. But Riley was already backing away, tears streaming down her face. I can't do this. I need space. I need time. Please, Leo whispered, reaching for her. Please don't go. She shook her head, fumbling for the door handle. I'm sorry. I can't. The last thing she saw as she fled was Leo's face, devastated and resigned, as if he'd always known this moment would come. As if he'd been waiting 20 years for the other shoe to drop, for the full weight of his childhood actions to finally claim whatever chance at happiness he might have had. The door closed between them with a soft click that echoed like thunder in the empty hallway. The winter sun cast long shadows through Leo's penthouse windows as he mechanically reviewed documents for the upcoming foundation gala. Papers covered his usually pristine desk, but his mind kept drifting to the empty space beside him where Riley had stood just days ago. Her absence felt like a physical ache, deeper than the chest pain that had first brought them together. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Cole, the venue coordinator needs final approval on the seating arrangements." "Send them in," he replied, his voice rough from disuse. As he examined the charts, his eyes lingered on the healthcare worker tables, specifically arranged to honor frontline staff. He'd planned it weeks ago, hoping to surprise Riley. Now he wondered if she'd even attend. Across town, Riley moved through her emergency room shifts like a ghost. She performed her duties with practiced precision, but her usual warmth was missing. Colleagues noticed but didn't press, attributing her mood to her mother's declining health. "BP's dropping," she announced mechanically, working on an elderly patient. "Starting second line." "You've been different lately," her colleague Sarah commented during their break. "Want to talk about it?" Riley shook her head, staring into her untouched coffee. "Just tired." But it wasn't just exhaustion. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Leo's face, both as the guilty child he'd been and the broken man he'd become. The weight of 20 years of secrets pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. At home, her mother's condition continued to deteriorate. The new medication helped, but Margaret's strength was clearly fading. Yet even in her weakness, she remained acutely aware of her daughter's distress. "Something's troubling you, sweet girl," Margaret observed one evening as Riley adjusted her pillows. "I'm fine, Mama. Just worried about you." Margaret caught her daughter's hand. "The Lord didn't give me a foolish child. I know heartache when I see it." Riley's carefully constructed walls trembled. "It's complicated." "Love usually is," Margaret replied softly. "But hatred and unforgiveness, those are what truly wear us down." Later that night, unable to sleep, Riley passed by her mother's room and heard Margaret's wavering voice in prayer. "Lord, free my daughter from whatever chains bind her heart. Help her find the strength to forgive. Not for anyone else's sake, but for her own peace." The words pierced Riley's defenses, bringing fresh tears to her eyes. She pressed her hand against the wall, listening as her mother continued to pray for her healing, her freedom, her ability to love again. Meanwhile, Leo threw himself into finalizing details for his foundation's newest initiative. The Foster Children's Future Fund would provide educational support, therapy services, and long-term mentorship for kids in the system. He'd been planning it for months, inspired by Riley's story, but now it felt more urgent than ever. "We need to ensure continuity of care," he insisted during a board meeting. "These children need more than just temporary solutions. They need stability, consistency, someone who won't disappear when things get hard." His voice caught on the last words, thinking of his own failure to be that person for Riley all those years ago. The days blurred together. Leo attended necessary meetings, signed required documents, and maintained his public responsibilities. But in private moments, he found himself returning to prayer, not for Riley's return, but for her healing. One afternoon, while reviewing applications for the foster program, he came across a photo of a little girl with Riley's same determined expression. Something inside him broke. He pushed back from his desk and finally allowed himself to really feel the weight of everything, not just the recent pain, but 2 decades of carried guilt. I'm sorry. He whispered to the empty room. I'm so sorry for being too afraid to face it sooner. Riley's emotional numbness began to crack during a particularly difficult shift. A young boy came in, injured from a dare gone wrong, and she found herself having to step away for a moment. In the quiet of the supply closet, she confronted the tangled mess of emotions she'd been avoiding. The anger was still there, but beneath it lay something deeper, a profound sadness for two children whose lives had been irreversibly changed by a single moment. She thought about Leo, carrying that guilt alone all these years, punishing himself with solitude. She thought about herself, building walls to protect against memories she couldn't fully access. That evening, caring for her mother, Riley noticed how Margaret's hands shook as she held her Bible. "Read to me?" Margaret asked. Riley settled into the familiar chair and opened to her mother's favorite passage about forgiveness. As she read the words aloud, something shifted in her heart, not a dramatic change, but a quiet opening, like a door cracking to let in fresh air. Across the city, Leo stood at his window, watching night settle over Chicago. The foundation gala was less than a week away. Everything was in place: the venue, the presentations, the announcement of the new Foster initiative. But none of it felt complete without Riley's presence. He turned away from the window and faced the childhood box he'd finally placed on display instead of hiding away. Inside lay the prayer he'd written as a scared little boy, begging God to save the girl who'd shown him kindness even when he didn't deserve it. Both Leo and Riley stood at their own crossroads, he with his determination to make amends through action rather than isolation, she with her growing understanding that forgiveness might be more about freedom than forgetting. Neither knew what the next step should be, but both felt the subtle shift of something changing, like the first warm breeze after a long winter. The grand ballroom of the Chicago Hilton glittered with elegant decorations and soft lighting. Tables draped in cream-colored linens filled the space, each scented with arrangements of white roses and golden candlelight. The Cole Foundation's annual gala was always a prestigious event, but tonight felt different. There was an undercurrent of anticipation in the air, a sense that something momentous was about to unfold. Leo Cole stood backstage, adjusting his tie for the third time. His hands trembled slightly as he touched the folded papers in his jacket pocket. For 20 years, he had carried his story like a heavy stone in his heart. Tonight, that would change. 5 minutes, Mr. Cole. A staff member whispered, clipboard in hand. Leo nodded, drawing in a deep breath. He thought of Riley, wondering if she might be watching the live stream. The foundation always broadcast these events for hospital staff who couldn't attend. He hadn't invited her, hadn't wanted to pressure her or make her feel obligated, but part of him hoped she might see what he was about to do. The MC's voice boomed through the speakers, introducing Leo to enthusiastic applause. He walked onto the stage, the spotlight warm on his face, and approached the podium. The familiar faces of Chicago's elite looked back at him expectantly. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Tonight, I want to tell you a story. Not about business success or technological innovation, but about a promise made by a scared little boy who didn't understand the consequences of his actions." Across town in the hospital's nurses' lounge, Riley sat alone during her break. The live stream played on the wall-mounted television, something she normally ignored. But tonight, she couldn't look away. Back at the gala, Leo continued, his voice growing stronger. "When I was 6 years old, I dared a classmate to do something dangerous on the playground. She got hurt, badly hurt. And while she lay there bleeding, she held my hand and told me not to cry." His voice caught slightly. "She comforted me, even though I was the reason she was in pain." The ballroom had gone completely silent. Even the servers had stopped moving, caught by the raw emotion in his words. I made a promise that day, to marry her when we grew up. It was a child's way of trying to make things right. But she disappeared after the accident, and I carried that guilt, that promise, that memory of undeserved kindness with me for 20 years. In the nurse's lounge, Riley's hands flew to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes as fragments of memory surfaced, the metallic taste of blood, the rough wood of the playground equipment, the feeling of a small hand clutching hers. I chose solitude, Leo continued, not because of the promise to marry, but because I couldn't forgive myself. I built walls of wealth and isolation, thinking I could somehow atone through loneliness. But recently, God showed me that true redemption isn't found in punishment, it's found in action. He paused, taking a sip of water, his hands steadier now. Tonight, I'm announcing a new initiative called the Riley Promise. It's a comprehensive support program for displaced children, those in foster care, those awaiting adoption, those who, like that little girl on the playground, might feel lost and alone. The projector screen behind him illuminated with details of the program: educational support, therapy services, long-term mentorship, healthcare assistance. Leo's voice grew passionate as he outlined the ways they would help ensure no child fell through the cracks of the system. In the nurse's lounge, Riley watched through tears as Leo detailed the program. Not once did he mention their recent encounters. Not once did he try to use this moment to win her back or influence her feelings. This wasn't about their potential future. It was purely about redemption for the past. The Riley Promise isn't just about providing resources, Leo explained to the captivated audience. It's about being there consistently, showing up when things are hard, and creating lasting change in young lives. It's about learning from our mistakes and turning past pain into future purpose. He gripped the edges of the podium, his next words coming straight from his heart. To that little girl who showed me kindness I didn't deserve, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for being the reason you got hurt. I'm sorry for staying silent when I should have spoken up. And I'm sorry it took me 20 years to turn that regret into something meaningful. Riley pressed her hand against the television screen, tears flowing freely now. She could see the genuine pain in his eyes, the weight of 2 decades of carried guilt. The truth is, Leo continued, his voice thick with emotion, sometimes the biggest promises we make aren't the ones we speak aloud. They're the ones we make in our hearts, promises to do better, to be better, to make something good come from our mistakes. That's what the Riley Promise is about. Not a child's vow to marry, but an adult's commitment to create positive change. The ballroom erupted in applause, but Leo barely heard it. He stepped back from the podium, feeling lighter somehow, as if speaking his truth had finally lifted a burden he'd carried for far too long. In the nurse's lounge, Riley sank to her knees, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she'd witnessed. She understood now. Leo hadn't been trying to claim her or control her future. He'd been working to redeem their shared past, to transform an old hurt into something beautiful and healing. The live stream continued showing the gala's proceedings, but Riley barely noticed. Her heart was too full, too raw with the realization that sometimes the greatest acts of love aren't grand gestures or romantic declarations, but the quiet work of making things right. The morning light filtered softly through the hospital room window, casting gentle shadows across the worn quilts covering Riley's mother. The steady beep of monitors had become like a lullaby over the past weeks, but today the rhythm seemed different, slower, more deliberate. Riley sat in the familiar chair beside the bed, her hand resting gently on her mother's frail fingers. She'd been here countless times before as a nurse, watching other families navigate these sacred moments. But being on this side of the experience felt entirely different. Her mother's eyes fluttered open, finding Riley's face with surprising clarity. "My beautiful girl," she whispered, her voice thin but filled with love. "You look tired." "I'm okay, Mom," Riley assured her, forcing a smile. "Just focusing on you right now." The morning sunlight caught the silver cross hanging around her mother's neck, the same one she'd worn every day since adopting Riley. It had been a symbol of faith through their hardest times, through tight budgets and long nights, through all the questions about Riley's past that they couldn't answer. "God's timing," her mother murmured, as if reading Riley's thoughts. "He brought you answers when you were ready for them." Riley squeezed her mother's hand gently. "I'm still trying to understand it all." Her mother's breath came slower now, but her words carried weight. "Sometimes understanding isn't as important as accepting. You've always carried such heavy burdens, trying to prove yourself worthy of love." Tears welled in Riley's eyes. "You taught me what real love looks like, Mom. You and Dad, you chose me. And now you're afraid to choose," her mother said softly. "Afraid that opening your heart means losing your strength." The morning light strengthened, warming the room as Riley's mother gathered her remaining energy. Her eyes, though tired, held a familiar wisdom that had guided Riley through every major decision in her life. "Listen carefully, my sweet girl," she whispered. "These are the last words I'll share with you on this earth." She paused, her breathing labored but steady. "Choose joy without fear." Riley leaned closer, her tears falling freely now. "Mom, perfect love casts out fear," her mother continued, quoting the scripture they'd read together countless times. "You've lived so long protecting yourself, but real strength isn't found in walls. It's found in choosing to love anyway." The monitors beeped slower as her mother's eyes drifted closed. "I'm so proud of who you've become," she whispered. "So proud of your heart." Her voice trailed off as her grip on Riley's hand loosened. The morning light seemed to embrace the room as her mother's spirit slipped peacefully away, leaving behind a legacy of chosen love and unwavering faith. The funeral was held 3 days later, a simple but beautiful service filled with the hymns her mother had loved. Riley stood strong through the prayers and eulogies, accepting hugs and condolences with quiet grace. But afterward, she needed to walk alone. The cemetery paths were quiet in the late afternoon light. Riley's heels clicked softly against the pavement as she walked, her black dress moving gently in the breeze. She found herself talking to God as she had so often seen her mother do, not with formal prayers, but with honest questions and raw emotion. "I understand now," she said softly to the empty air. "About choosing love, about forgiveness." She paused beside a flowering dogwood tree. "Mom chose to love me before she knew anything about me. She chose joy even when things were hard." The setting sun painted the sky in gentle pinks and purples as Riley continued her solitary walk. Her mother's final words echoed in her heart. "Choose joy without fear." Across town, Leo sat in his penthouse office, staring at his untouched computer screen. He'd heard about Riley's mother through hospital contacts, but had kept his distance, respecting the boundaries between them. His heart ached to comfort her, but he knew this was her journey to walk. The foundation work kept him busy, but his thoughts constantly drifted to Riley. He'd surrendered his hopes to God's timing, focusing instead on making the Riley Promise initiative as impactful as possible. The first round of support services had already helped dozens of children, and more programs were in development. The sky darkened outside his windows as evening settled over the city. Leo had just decided to call it a day when his intercom buzzed. "Mr. Cole," his security desk announced. "Riley Parker is here to see you." Leo's heart jumped, but he kept his voice steady. "Please send her up." The minutes stretched as he waited, trying not to pace. When the knock finally came, it was soft but determined. Leo opened the door to find Riley standing there, still in her black dress from the funeral, her eyes tired but clear. They stood for a moment in silence, the weight of their shared history and separate journeys hanging between them. The city lights twinkled beyond the windows, waiting to see what choices would be made in this quiet evening moment. "Would you like to come in?" Leo asked softly, stepping aside to make space. Riley nodded, crossing the threshold with measured steps. The penthouse was dimly lit, the city lights casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. She paused by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her reflection ghost-like against the darkening sky. "I'm so sorry about your mother," Leo said quietly, maintaining a respectful distance. "Thank you." Riley's voice was steady despite her exhaustion. She was ready, at peace. She turned to face him, her eyes holding a new kind of clarity. "She taught me something important in her final moments." Leo waited patiently, sensing the weight of what was to come. The silence between them felt different now, no longer heavy with unspoken pain, but open with possibility. "All these weeks," Riley began, "I've been struggling with the idea of destiny, with this childhood promise hanging over us like some divine plan we're supposed to fulfill." She took a deep breath. "But that's not what love is supposed to be, is it?" "No," Leo agreed softly. "I see that now. My mother chose to love me," Riley continued, moving closer. "She didn't know my past, didn't know what challenges I might bring. She just chose, every single day." Leo nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. "And I've been holding on to a promise made by children, trying to make it mean something it never could." "Exactly." Riley's voice grew stronger. "I don't want a relationship built on obligation or childhood vows. I don't want to be the fulfillment of someone's penance." "Riley." Leo stepped forward, his heart in his voice. "You were never that. The promise. It wasn't about penance. It was about hope. About believing that something good could come from that terrible day." "I know that now," she said gently. "But we can't build a future on that foundation. We need to choose each other as we are now, freely, honestly, without the weight of the past." Leo moved to the window beside her, their reflections standing side by side against the city lights. "You're right. That promise, it shaped my life for 20 years, but holding on to it means neither of us can truly move forward." He turned to face her fully. "So I release it, here and now. Whatever happens between us should come from choice, not obligation." Riley felt tears prick her eyes, but they were healing tears. "My mother's last words to me were, 'Choose joy, without fear.' I think I finally understand what she meant." "What did she mean?" Leo asked softly. "That real love isn't about safety or certainty. It's about choosing to be vulnerable anyway. About trusting God enough to open your heart, even when it scares you." Leo reached for her hand, hesitating just before touching it. "May I?" Riley nodded, and their fingers intertwined. The simple touch held no pressure, no expectations, just connection. "Would you pray with me?" Riley asked. "Not about promises or the past, just for guidance, for wisdom as we move forward." "I'd like that," Leo replied. They bowed their heads together, still holding hands. Riley's voice was quiet but sure as she began. "Lord, thank you for your faithfulness. Thank you for bringing beauty from ashes and for teaching us that love is always a choice. Guide us as we release the past and step into whatever you have planned. Help us trust your timing, not our own." Leo's voice joined hers, steady and sincere. "Thank you for second chances, and for showing us that real love comes from freedom, not obligation. Give us wisdom as we move forward, and help us honor you in every step." Amen, they whispered together. When they looked up, something had shifted in the air between them. The heavy mantle of the past had lifted, leaving room for something new to grow. Riley reached up slowly, touching Leo's cheek with gentle fingers. "I choose this," she said softly. "Not because of who we were, but because of who we are now." Leo's eyes filled with emotion as he covered her hand with his own. "And I choose you, freely, completely, without any promises except the ones we make together." Their first kiss was gentle, a beginning rather than an ending. It held no desperate passion or urgent need, just the tender exploration of two hearts choosing to trust. When they pulled apart, both were smiling, their eyes bright with joy freely chosen. They stood together by the window, the city lights twinkling like stars below them. No more words were needed in that moment. They had said everything that mattered. The future stretched before them, unmarked by old vows but rich with new possibilities, grounded in faith and strengthened by choice. Spring melted into summer, and summer faded into fall, each day bringing small moments that wove Leo and Riley's lives more tightly together. They built their relationship carefully, mindfully, letting trust grow naturally through shared experiences both ordinary and profound. On Sunday mornings, they volunteered at the free clinic, working side by side. Riley's medical expertise complemented Leo's organizational skills as they helped expand services to reach more families in need. The quiet satisfaction in Leo's eyes whenever they helped someone reminded Riley why she'd fallen in love with him, not for his wealth or status, but for his genuine desire to make a difference. "You know," Riley said one afternoon as they sorted medical supplies, "I never thought I'd be dating someone who color codes inventory spreadsheets." Leo grinned, adding another box of bandages to his meticulously organized shelf. "And I never thought I'd be dating someone who can recite medication interactions in her sleep." "That was one time," Riley protested, laughing, "and I was really tired after that double shift." Their laughter echoed through the storage room, comfortable and warm. These were the moments that mattered most, not grand gestures or elaborate dates, but simple shared purpose. The restoration of Leo's childhood church became their special project together. The old building had stood empty for years, its red brick walls weathered but strong. Leo had purchased it quietly, wanting to transform it into something that would serve the community. "I used to sit right there," he told Riley one day, pointing to a worn pew as they surveyed the sanctuary. "Every Sunday, wondering if God was listening to my prayers about you." Riley squeezed his hand. He was listening. He just had a different timeline in mind. They worked alongside the construction crews, Leo rolling up his sleeves to paint walls, while Riley planned the layout for the medical wing. The building slowly transformed, its bones remaining strong, while new life flowed through its halls. Just like their relationship, Riley thought, built on a foundation of shared history, but growing into something entirely new. October brought changes at the hospital as Riley stepped into her new role as emergency department clinical manager. The promotion meant more responsibility, but also more opportunity to implement the improvements she'd long envisioned. "I'm so proud of you," Leo told her over dinner the night after her first day in the new position. They sat in her small apartment kitchen, sharing take-out Chinese food because neither had energy to cook. "I'm terrified," Riley admitted, pushing rice around her plate. "What if I mess this up?" "Then you'll learn from it and do better next time," Leo said simply, "just like you taught me to do." The months weren't all smooth sailing. Grief still caught Riley unawares sometimes, missing her mother with an ache that took her breath away. Leo learned to recognize the signs, the way her shoulders would tense, how her smile wouldn't quite reach her eyes. On those days, he'd simply hold her, letting her cry when she needed to. "I wish she could have known you better," Riley said one evening, curled up on Leo's couch as rain tapped against the windows. "Really known you, I mean, not just as the guy from my past." Leo stroked her hair gently. "I think she knew the important parts. She raised an incredible daughter who taught me what real love looks like." They built traditions together: Sunday morning pancakes before church, weekly video calls with Leo's parents, where they slowly, carefully rebuilt those relationships, evening walks in the park, where they'd hold hands and talk about everything and nothing. The Community Center project progressed steadily through the seasons. By early December, the main renovation was complete. The old sanctuary had been transformed into a multi-purpose space, while classrooms became medical exam rooms and counseling offices. The basement now housed a food pantry and clothing distribution center. On the evening before the grand opening, Leo and Riley walked through the quiet building together. Christmas lights twinkled in the windows, casting a warm glow over the freshly painted walls. They stopped in what had once been the church's small chapel, now a peaceful meditation room open to all faiths. "Remember what you told me that day in the hospital chapel?" Leo asked softly. "About faith and calling." Riley nodded, thinking back to that conversation that had helped bridge their early uncertainty. "You said that sometimes God's greatest gifts come disguised as our deepest wounds." Leo continued. "I didn't fully understand then, but standing here now—" He took both her hands in his, turning to face her fully. Riley's heart quickened as she recognized something different in his expression, a mixture of nervousness and certainty she'd never seen before. "That playground accident nearly destroyed both our lives," Leo said quietly. "But God used it to shape us, to teach us about forgiveness and redemption. And now—" He reached into his pocket and slowly knelt down. Riley's breath caught as he opened a small velvet box, revealing a simple but elegant ring. No elaborate production, no audience, just them, in this peaceful space that represented both their past and their future. "Riley Parker." Leo's voice was steady despite the tears in his eyes. "I'm not asking because of a childhood promise or any obligation. I'm asking because you've taught me what real love is, patient, kind, and freely chosen. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Riley's cheeks as she looked at this man who had become her best friend, her partner in service, her chosen love. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." The ring slipped perfectly onto her finger as Leo stood and pulled her close. Their kiss tasted of joy and tears and future possibilities. Through the windows, snow began to fall softly, adding to the peace of the moment. Later that night, as they sat together on Leo's couch drinking hot chocolate, Riley studied her ring in the lamplight. It wasn't flashy or ostentatious. Leo knew her too well for that. Instead, it was elegant and practical, much like their love. "What are you thinking?" Leo asked, watching her with tender eyes. "I'm thinking about how far we've come." Riley answered honestly. "From that day in the hospital when you recognized me, to now, it's been quite a journey. And we're just getting started," Leo said softly, pulling her closer. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall over the city lights. Tomorrow would bring the excitement of the community center's opening, the next steps in their careers, and all the joy and challenges of planning a future together. But for now, they simply held each other, grateful for the way God had turned their childhood tragedy into adult triumph, their old wounds into new purpose. The evening wrapped around them like a warm blanket as they sat together, two hearts that had chosen each other freely, building a love story entirely their own. 1 year later, sunlight streamed through the restored stained glass windows of the old church, casting rainbow patterns across the polished wooden pews. The sanctuary buzzed with excitement as dozens of children from the Riley Promise program filled the front rows, their eager faces shining with anticipation. Leo stood at the altar, his hands clasped tightly to keep them from trembling. The church looked different from the day of his childhood accident, warmer, more welcoming, filled with hope instead of shadows. The renovation had preserved its historic charm while creating a space that truly served the community. The first notes of music filled the air, but it wasn't the traditional wedding march. Instead, the children's choir began to sing the same gentle melody Riley had hummed that night at the gala when she saved Leo's life. The simple tune carried memories of both pain and healing, fear and faith. As the doors opened and Riley appeared, Leo felt tears well in his eyes. She walked down the aisle in a modest white dress, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers picked by the foster children that morning. Her face glowed with joy, and Leo saw in her eyes the same peace he'd found, the understanding that God had used their broken pieces to create something beautiful. The foster children beamed as Riley passed, some reaching out to touch her dress. These weren't just program participants, they had become family. Each child represented a life changed, a future restored, a promise kept in ways neither Leo nor Riley could have imagined as children themselves. Standing before their loved ones, Leo and Riley exchanged vows that acknowledged both their past and their future. God didn't just heal our wounds, Riley said, her voice clear and strong. He gave them purpose. Through you I learned that love is always a choice, and I choose you every day. Leo's voice shook slightly as he responded. You taught me that redemption isn't about erasing the past, but transforming it. I promise to love you not because of an old vow, but because of who we've become together. As they exchanged rings, the children's choir continued their sweet melody. The tune that had once steadied Riley's hands while saving Leo's life, now blessing their union. The music wrapped around them like a gentle embrace, bridging past and present. After the ceremony, the celebration spilled into the community center, where tables groaned with home-cooked food and children darted between guests with laughter. Leo and Riley moved through the crowd hand in hand, stopping to hug children, thank volunteers, and share moments with those who had become part of their extended family. As evening approached, Leo drew Riley onto the dance floor. As they swayed together, she rested her head on his shoulder. Listen, she whispered. The children had gathered again, spontaneously singing their song. The melody rose pure and clear, filling the space with joy. In that moment, Leo and Riley both felt the profound truth of God's redemption, how he had taken their childhood trauma and transformed it into a symphony of hope, not just for them, but for countless others. They stood together, surrounded by the evidence of God's faithfulness, restored buildings, healed hearts, and children who would never have to face their struggles alone. Their past hadn't disappeared, but it had been redeemed, becoming the foundation for a future neither could have imagined on their own. Hand in hand, they stepped forward into that future, their hearts full of gratitude for the way God had turned their pain into purpose, their wounds into wisdom, and their broken promises into beautiful beginnings. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.